Hello, welcome to Michael's Musings on Music. Today I want to talk about my 5 favorite orchestras. And I want to start with the Berlin Philharmonic. Arguably one of the best orchestras in the world. And they've had a long history of being one of the best orchestras in the world. They play with such commitment. They're like one organism. They even move with the music as they play. They listen so intently to each other. They're very intuitive and they react very quickly to what they hear and what they see from the conductor. There's something very special about their music making. And we are all able to watch their concerts through the digital concert hall. And if you don't know about this, I urge you to look into it. You are able to watch every concert that the Berlin Philharmonic have played since 2008. And it's such an inspiration to me and to other musicians to see and hear this great orchestra make music. So they're not only at the leading edge artistically, but they're also at the leading edge in technology. The other orchestra I want to mention is the Vienna Philharmonic, and what a history. They've premiered the symphonies of Brahms and the symphonies of Bruckner. Gustav Mahler was their music director at the turn of the 20th century. There's an incredible amount of history with the Vienna Philharmonic. And they do sound somewhat different than other orchestras. Now, when you listen to different orchestras today, a lot of them sound similar. They're all very good, but they sound quite the same. The Vienna Philharmonic has a distinctive sound and a very traditional sound. One reason is that they play on different instruments. The horn in Vienna is different than the horn that other orchestras play. The oboe in the Vienna Philharmonic is different than other orchestras play. So there's that. There's also this unbroken tradition from teacher to student, and then to their student, and then to their student. So in the Vienna Philharmonic, there's this line of teachers and students that continue this traditional sound that the Vienna Philharmonic have. And when it comes to playing a waltz, there is no other orchestra that can play a waltz like the Vienna Philharmonic. There's a certain lilt to how they play it that no other orchestra can really imitate. So for a lot of these reasons, the Vienna Philharmonic is also one of my favorite orchestras. Now, about the middle of the century, around 1950 or so, there was considered to be only 5 American orchestras that could compete with the great European orchestras. And they were the Boston Symphony, the New York Philharmonic, the Chicago Symphony, the Cleveland Orchestra, and my other favorite orchestra, the Philadelphia Orchestra. When you talk about the Philadelphia Orchestra, you have to talk about the Philadelphia sound, which really started back in the 1920s with Stokowski, who was their music director at the time. What is this Philadelphia sound? And really it pertains more to the strings than it does necessarily to the winds and the brass. Now, when I conducted in Florida, my principal violist was a retired Philadelphia Orchestra member. His name was Jim Fawcett. And I asked Jim one day, I said, "Jim, what is the Philadelphia sound and how did you achieve it?" And he said, kind of tongue-in-cheek, but he said to me, "Well, we never started a note at the same time and we never finished a note at the same time." Now, what I think he meant by that was that you then get this rounded sound, this very warm and lush string sound. It doesn't have that kind of, sharp edges when you play that way. And that's what he was saying when he talked about how they achieved this Philadelphia sound. Now, that sound isn't quite so prevalent today as it was many years ago, but it's still part of the Philadelphia Orchestra's DNA. And with their fantastic conductor, Yannick Nézet-Séguin, they're just, going from one success to the next They sound wonderful. They still have that lush sound, but also with a lot of power and a lot of passion. Now, in this day and age, there's no longer just 5 orchestras that can compete with the European orchestras. Now, almost every major city has a top-notch orchestra. And the other one I want to mention, my other favorite orchestra I want to mention, is the Los Angeles Philharmonic. Now, I had the opportunity to hear them play quite often when I worked as associate conductor of the Pacific Symphony. That's an orchestra in Orange County, just south of LA. So I had the opportunity to hear them quite a bit. And there's a certain sound with an American orchestra that's different than a European orchestra. American orchestras generally are a little more strident in a good way, quite rhythmically tight, very front sort of sounding. They're not quite as set back and lush and relaxed as the European sound. There's something a little more American about it. And the LA Philharmonic really exemplifies that. The other reason why I think the LA Philharmonic is one of my favorites right now is because of their music director, Gustavo Dudamel, who joined the orchestra when he was only 27 years old. He became the music director at 27. And, at that time, there was a lot of uproar about it all. But then things have to settle, and the music director and the orchestra begin to get to know each other more, and they develop over the years. And some relationships are not very good between a music director and an orchestra, and the artistic level can suffer. But Dudamel has really matured as an artist, as a conductor, and his artistic relationship with the LA Phil is fantastic. When you listen to recordings now or concerts, when you get the chance to see and hear a concert of the LA Philharmonic, they're absolutely playing at their top level. They're at the top of their game. And that's a lot to do with Gustavo Dudamel and his relationship with the orchestra. Now, my last 5 favorite orchestra is the Kenneth Symphony. Now, I know what you might be thinking. Well, he's really biased. Well, I certainly am. I'm their music director. I've been their music director for 6 years. But there is something very special about the Kenneth Symphony. First of all, they are all professional players. They're not, this isn't an amateur orchestra or a community orchestra. And those certainly have their place in the orchestral landscape. But if you want to hear these great works at the highest level, really exemplifying everything that's possible to get out of these works, then professional musicians can achieve that. And the Kenneth Symphony is only made up of professional musicians, very much like the Philadelphia Orchestra or an orchestra like that. Now, we call the Kenneth Symphony a regional orchestra, so it serves a region, not necessarily a city. And I will say this, that orchestras like the Kenneth Symphony are so much better now than they were 30, 40 years ago. There's a much higher level of musicianship from graduates from conservatories. Just the level of playing is much higher across the board. And so the Kenneth Symphony really has some of the finest musicians in the area. It's a joy to conduct them. I really miss, as we all do, the ability to be on the stage and to produce great music for our patrons. But that day will come. It seems like a long way away, but it will come. So I would say the Kenneth Symphony is, for all those reasons, one of my 5 favorite orchestras. Next time, I want to talk about my 5 favorite symphonies.